The dust storm came without warning, a furious wall of sand and grit that turned day into twilight. It swept across Shadow Canyon with the rage of an ancient spirit, erasing the boundary between earth and sky. Ethan Hawke watched it approach from the doorway of his cabin, his weathered face impassive. The summer of 1885 had brought little but dust and trouble to these territories. He'd seen worse. At 42, Ethan wore time like the leather of his well-used holster, cracked but resilient. His eyes, the pale blue of a winter sky, had grown harder with each passing season. The scar beneath his jaw traced a jagged line, a permanent reminder of how close death had come. 6 years in the cavalry during the brutal Apache campaigns of the 1870s, and another 6 alone in this canyon had taught him one immutable truth. Survival wasn't about strength, but about distance. From people, from the past, from hope itself. He secured the cabin's shutters and door against nature's assault. The wind howled like a wounded animal, demanding entry, finding every crack in the rough-hewn logs. Ethan moved with practiced efficiency, checking his supplies, his weapons, old habits. The storm might last hours or days. He had enough food, water, and ammunition. He always did. Just as he settled into his chair, rifle across his lap, he heard it, faint but unmistakable through the storm's fury. A gunshot, then another. The distinct crack of a Winchester, not the deeper boom of an Apache's stolen cavalry pistol. White men's trouble then, not his concern, but then came the high-pitched whinny of a horse in terror, followed by a sound that made him stiffen. A woman's scream cut short. "Damn it," he muttered, rising to his feet. He'd sworn to stay uninvolved, to let the world beyond his canyon solve its own problems. But some instincts ran deeper than oaths. He waited until the storm's first fury had passed, leaving a ghostly haze of suspended dust. Wrapping a bandana across his nose and mouth, he took his rifle, ammunition, and canteen. The weight of his Colt revolver against his hip was as familiar as his own heartbeat. Outside, the air tasted of copper and grit. Ethan followed the sound's direction, moving like a shadow across terrain he knew by heart. The dying light painted the red rock formations in shades of blood and rust. He found the dead horse first, a fine chestnut mare, good breeding, expensive tack. Not a traveler's mount, but a rich man's. The saddle bore the brand of the Double Cross Ranch, owned by Judge Thaddeus Monroe, the self-appointed justice of these territories. Blood trails led away from the horse toward a narrow fissure in the canyon wall. Ethan crouched, examining the ground with eyes trained by years of tracking. 2 sets of boot prints following smaller, lighter footprints. Barefoot, moving fast. A woman running. Men pursuing. Then signs of a struggle. More blood. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew what happened to women caught alone in these canyons. He'd seen the aftermath too many times during his cavalry days. His hand moved unconsciously to the jagged scar beneath his jaw, a permanent reminder of what people were capable of. Unlike the deeper, hidden scar on his chest, this one had been inflicted by others rather than himself. The blood trail continued into the fissure, narrowing to a cramped passage that opened into a small cave. Ethan moved silently on, every sense alert. Ambushes often use the injured as bait. If someone waited with a gun, he'd have one chance to react. The cave smelled of blood and fear. In the dim light filtering through the narrow entrance, he saw her. A woman pressed against the far wall, one hand clutching a wound beneath her ribs, the other holding a knife in a trembling grip. Her long black hair hung in wild tangles around a face both fierce and beautiful. Apache from her features and the remnants of her deerskin dress, now torn and bloodied. Her dark eyes locked onto him immediately, alert despite her obvious pain. The knife didn't waver. "I'm not here to hurt you," Ethan said, his voice rough from disuse. He spoke first in English, then in the broken Apache he'd learned during his time as a scout. The woman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her gaze, not relief, but recognition. She lowered the knife slightly and spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "Finally you have come." The words, so unexpected, made Ethan pause. He kept his rifle lowered but ready. "You're bleeding badly," he said, ignoring her strange greeting. "Those men who were chasing you?" Dead, she replied, the single word carrying neither remorse nor fear. But more will come, they always do. She tried to stand and immediately collapsed, the knife clattering to the stone floor. Ethan moved forward instinctively, catching her before she hit the ground. She felt light in his arms, burning with fever, yet her grip on his shirt was surprisingly strong. "You'll die out here without help," he said. The woman looked up at him, her eyes unnaturally bright. "We all die, Ethan Hawke. The question is, what we live for first." Ethan froze. "How do you know my name?" A small pained smile touched her lips. "I know many things about you. The scar beneath your jaw from the Apache prisoner who nearly killed you. The deeper scar on your chest that no one has seen. The nightmares that wake you every night at the same hour." A cold feeling washed over Ethan, having nothing to do with the cave's chill. "Who are you?" "Nayeli," she whispered, her strength visibly fading. "Daughter of Red Wolf, keeper of dreams for my people." Her eyes rolled back as consciousness left her. Ethan hesitated only a moment before lifting her carefully. The decision was made before he even acknowledged it. He couldn't leave her to die, no matter how unsettling her words had been. The storm had intensified again, painting the world in shades of amber dust. Ethan carried Nayeli across his threshold, the first person to enter his home in over 3 years. The significance wasn't lost on him. Every person he'd ever cared for had eventually died because of that care. It was the curse he carried, the balance the universe demanded. His cabin was sparse but orderly. A single room with a stone fireplace, rough wooden table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. Shelves held books, one of his few indulgences, and the tools of survival. He laid Nayeli on his bed, quickly assessing her condition in the better light. The wound was deep, a knife thrust beneath her ribs that had missed vital organs by mere inches. Infection had already set in, evidenced by the angry red streaks radiating outward. Without treatment, she wouldn't last the night. Ethan worked methodically, heating water, gathering his limited medical supplies. He'd learned field surgery from necessity, not training. As he cut away the bloodied fabric around her wound, he noticed a small leather pouch secured around her waist. It had been hidden beneath her dress, protected even during her desperate flight. He hesitated, then carefully removed it and set it aside. Whatever it contained had been important enough for her to guard while running for her life. He'd examine it later. Cleaning the wound revealed its severity. Ethan's hands remained steady as he extracted fragments of a broken blade, sterilized the wound with whiskey, and prepared to stitch it closed. Throughout the procedure, Nayeli remained unconscious, though pain occasionally registered on her face. As he worked, Ethan studied her more carefully. She was older than he'd first thought, perhaps 30, not the young girl he'd assumed. Her hands bore calluses of both work and weapon use. A fighter then, not merely a victim. The remnants of her clothing were finely crafted, with symbols of status woven into the patterns. The daughter of a chief, she'd said, a person of importance. When he turned her slightly to wrap bandages around her torso, he noticed a tattoo between her shoulder blades, an intricate pattern of interconnected circles with a central spiral. The design triggered a memory he couldn't quite place, something seen long ago, or perhaps in a dream. With the wound cleaned and dressed, Ethan covered her with his single blanket. Her breathing had steadied somewhat, but fever still burned through her. He made a poultice of herbs he'd learned about from an old cavalry doctor, golden seal, echinacea, and others gathered from the canyon, and placed it on her forehead. Only then did he examine the leather pouch. Inside, he found a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. One half contained a crude map with landmarks he recognized from the territories to the north. The other half held something unexpected, what appeared to be lyrics to a song written in 2 languages. The English portions stirred something in his memory, a half-forgotten melody from childhood. Soft sunlight broke through the cabin's single window, dust motes dancing like spirits in the air. Remember, child, the morning brings renewal. The darkness yields to light, despair to prayer. The words trailed off, continuing in Apache script he couldn't read, but the partial verse haunted him. They were from a lullaby his mother had sung to him as a child, before the fever took her when he was 8. How could an Apache woman possess words his mother had sung, words he'd told no one about in all these years? Ethan folded the paper carefully and returned it to the pouch. The coincidence, if it was coincidence, unsettled him deeply. He spent the night in his chair, rifle across his lap, watching both his patient and the door. The storm raged on outside, a fitting accompaniment to his troubled thoughts. Nayeli's fever peaked near midnight, her delirious murmurs shifting between English and Apache. He caught fragments, warnings about the judge, pleas to unknown ancestors, and once his own name spoken with such certainty it chilled him. Dawn broke with unearthly stillness as the storm finally passed. Golden light filtered through the shutters, falling across Nayeli's face. Her eyes opened, clear and alert, in a way that suggested the fever had broken. She studied the cabin, taking in every detail before her gaze settled on Ethan. "You saved my life," she said. Not a question, not gratitude, a simple acknowledgement of fact. "You needed help." He handed her a cup of water. "Drink slowly." She obeyed, watching him over the rim of the cup. "You want to know how I know your name?" Among other things. Nayeli attempted to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her stitches. Ethan moved forward to help, supporting her back as she adjusted against the wall. His fingers brushed against the tattooed design between her shoulder blades, and an electric sensation shot through him. Not physical, but something deeper, like recognition. "That symbol," he said, "what does it mean?" "It marks me as dream keeper of my people," she replied. "Only one woman in each generation bears it. We see what others cannot. Past, present, future, the boundaries blur for us." "You're saying you're some kind of seer?" Ethan couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "I'm saying I dreamed of you, Ethan Hawke, long before I knew your name." Her dark eyes held his, unflinching. "I've dreamed of you since I was a child, standing in flames, carrying a small girl from a burning village." Ethan's blood went cold. No one knew about that night. The raid on the Apache village in 1879 that had gone wrong, the orders he'd refused to follow, the child he'd rescued against commands. It had cost him everything. His career, his honor, very nearly his life. "Coincidence," he muttered, turning away. "Someone told you stories about me." "The scar on your chest," she continued, as if he hadn't spoken, "3 inches below your heart, made by your own knife the night after the raid, when you nearly took your own life out of shame." Ethan's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, feeling the raised line beneath his shirt. He'd been alone that night, drunk on whiskey and self-loathing in a room at Fort Redemption. No one had ever seen that scar, no one living, at least. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice hardening. "To complete what your mother began." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "My mother was a settler's wife who died of fever when I was 8 years old." Nayeli's expression softened slightly. "Is that what your father told you?" Before he could respond, she continued, "Sarah Hawke was much more than a settler's wife. She lived among my people for 3 years before she married your father. She learned our ways, our language, our songs. She and my grandmother created something together, a bridge between our peoples." She gestured to the pouch. "You found the song." "It's just an old lullaby," Ethan said, though uncertainty crept into his voice. "It's half of the soul's melody, a song of power that can bring peace to those who have died in violence. Your mother wrote the English verses in 1854. My grandmother, the Apache. Together, they form a whole." Nayeli's voice grew urgent. "I need to reach Echo Valley before the full moon. The other half of the song was lost when your mother died. I had hoped you might know it." Ethan shook his head slowly. "I only remember fragments. Even if what you're saying is true, which I don't believe for a second, I can't help you." "You already have," she replied. "By saving my life, you've bound our paths together. I don't believe in destiny, and yet it believes in you." Nayeli's eyes held his. "You are the man I saw in my dreams. According to the sacred law of my people, you are my husband now." The words landed like a physical blow. Ethan took a step back, his expression hardening. "I live alone for a reason, lady. I'm no one's husband, and I'm not getting involved in whatever trouble you're in." "The trouble found you the moment you carried me across your threshold," she replied calmly. Judge Monroe will not stop hunting me. He wants what I carry, the map to Echo Valley and half of the soul's melody. He believes there's a treasure there that will make him rich beyond measure. Monroe? Ethan's interest sharpened despite himself. Judge Thaddeus Monroe had a reputation throughout the territories, a man who administered his own brand of justice, backed by hired guns and political connections. Some called him fair, others ruthless. All agreed he was dangerous. Why would a territorial judge care about an Apache song? Because it leads to Echo Valley, a place sacred to my people, hidden in the mountains where the spirits of our ancestors can be heard on the wind. The judge believes there's gold there, a mine of immeasurable wealth. He doesn't understand that the true treasure cannot be held in mortal hands. Ethan paced the small confines of his cabin. Every instinct told him to put this woman on a horse and send her on her way when she could travel. Getting involved meant risking the fragile peace he'd built here, the careful isolation that kept others safe from his curse. And yet, the mention of his mother, the lullaby he'd thought known only to him, the details about his past that no one could know, they gnawed at his certainty. "These dreams of yours," he said finally, "what exactly did you see about me?" Naeli's expression softened. "I saw a warrior who chose mercy when others chose blood. I saw a man carrying the weight of lives he couldn't save. I saw someone who believes he's cursed to bring death to those he cares for." Her voice dropped lower. "I saw you standing in Echo Valley, singing the soul's melody as the moon rose full above the cliffs, bringing peace to countless troubled spirits, including your own." A heavy silence fell between them. Outside, a raven called, three harsh cries that seemed to emphasize the moment's significance. "I don't sing," Ethan said finally, the words falling flat in the stillness. The faintest smile touched Naeli's lips. "You will." Before he could respond, a sound caught his attention. Hoofbeats, distant but approaching. Multiple riders moving fast. Ethan moved to the window, peering through a narrow gap in the shutters. Dust rose on the horizon, at least 6 riders following the path from the main trail. "Looks like your friends have found us," he said grimly. "Not friends," Nayeli replied, attempting to rise. The effort caused her face to pale, but determination kept her upright. "Monroe's men. They'll kill you and take me." "They can try." Ethan checked his rifle and revolver with practiced movements. "Can you ride?" She nodded. "If necessary." "It's necessary. There's an exit path through the back of the canyon. Little known, difficult terrain." "You're coming with me?" Surprise colored her voice. Ethan didn't answer immediately. The approaching riders represented everything he'd sought to avoid: violence, complication, involvement. The rational choice was to send her out the back while he delayed them. She'd likely die, but that wasn't his concern. Yet something held him back from that cold calculation. The lullaby, perhaps. The mystery of his mother. Or simply the realization that his careful isolation hadn't brought him peace, only a different kind of prison. "I'll get you to the next trading post," he said finally. "After that, you're on your own." Relief and something deeper flickered in Nayeli's eyes. "The spirits chose well." "The spirits had nothing to do with it," Ethan muttered, gathering essential supplies. "Save your strength. We leave in 5 minutes." As he prepared for their escape, Ethan felt the weight of inevitability settling over him. For 6 years, he'd avoided entanglement with the world beyond his canyon. Now, in the space of a day, he was preparing to flee with an injured Apache woman who claimed to know his deepest secrets, pursued by one of the most powerful men in the territory. And somewhere in the back of his mind, his mother's lullaby played on an endless loop, accompanied by a question that refused to be silenced. What if Nayeli was telling the truth? The riders were closing in. No time left for doubts. Ethan helped Nayeli onto his spare horse, noting how she bit back pain without complaint. As they rode out through the hidden canyon passage, he cast one glance back at the cabin that had been his refuge in prison. He wouldn't be returning. He felt that certainty in his bones. Whatever curse he carried would find new victims now. And somehow, despite everything, that thought brought not dread but a strange, forgotten sensation. It felt like purpose. They rode through terrain few white men had ever traversed. Narrow passages between towering red rock formations, dried creek beds that became death traps during flash floods. slopes of loose shale that could break a horse's leg with one misstep. Ethan navigated by instinct and experience, leading them ever northward. Nayeli rode silently behind him, her posture gradually slumping as exhaustion and pain took their toll. When they finally stopped at midday in the shelter of an overhanging cliff, she nearly fell from the saddle. Ethan caught her, feeling the heat of renewed fever through her clothing. "You need rest," he said, helping her to a flat rock in the shade. "There's no time." Her voice remained strong despite her physical weakness. "Monroe's men will have picked up our trail by now." "They'll be following a false lead," Ethan replied, offering her his canteen. "I laid tracks heading east before we turned north. It won't fool them forever, but it buys us time." He checked her wound, finding it hot and seeping. The journey had reopened the stitches he'd so carefully placed. Wordlessly, he cleaned and rebandaged it, using the last of his medicinal herbs in a fresh poultice. "You have a healer's hands," Nayeli observed, gentle despite their strength. "Necessity, not talent." He avoided her eyes. "I've patched up enough wounds to know what works, including your own." It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he busied himself with their sparse provisions, dividing jerky and hardtack into careful portions. They ate in silence, the vast landscape around them emphasizing their solitude. "Why does Monroe want you specifically?" Ethan asked finally. "There must be others who know the way to this Echo Valley." Nayeli's expression darkened. "I am the last dream keeper. The others were killed in the raids 6 years ago. The raids you refused to lead." The blunt reference to his past made Ethan stiffen. "That doesn't explain Monroe's interest. 2 months ago, he came to our reservation with government papers claiming rights to search for minerals on our sacred lands. When our elders refused, his men attacked at night. They killed the council members and took me prisoner." Her voice remained steady despite the horror of her words. "Monroe believes only a dreamkeeper can find the entrance to Echo Valley. The map shows the region, but not the hidden path that opens only when the soul's melody is sung. And he thinks there's gold there. He thinks the valley holds a massive deposit of gold and silver, hidden by my ancestors." A bitter smile touched her lips. "White men always believe our sacred places must contain something they value." "Does it?" Ethan asked. "Contain gold?" Nayeli studied him carefully before answering. "Echo Valley holds a treasure beyond price, but not one that can be mined or spent. It is a place of healing for the body, for the spirit, for the divide between the living and the dead." Ethan snorted softly. "Sounds like superstition to me. Says the man who believes himself cursed." Her words carried no judgment, only observation. They fell silent again. Ethan found himself studying Nayeli when she wasn't watching. The proud line of her profile, the quiet dignity she maintained despite her condition, the surprising gentleness in hands that clearly knew how to fight. She was unlike any woman he'd encountered, white or Apache. "We should move," he said, rising abruptly. "Another few hours before dusk." Nayeli stood with effort, swaying slightly. "Where are we headed?" "Eagle's Nest, small settlement about day's ride from here." He adjusted the saddle on her horse. "There's a woman there who might help us, if what you've told me about my mother is true." "Mary Crow," Nayeli said immediately. Ethan's head snapped up. "How did you know that name?" "She appears in my dreams too. A woman of both worlds, friend to your mother and mine." Nayeli's eyes seemed to look beyond their surroundings. "She guards the other half of the soul's melody." The certainty in her voice unsettled him. Mary Crow had been a fixture of his early childhood, a half Apache woman his father allowed to visit despite the disapproval of other settlers. He had called her Aunt Mary until his mother's death, after which his father had forbidden further contact. "Mary Crow hasn't seen me in over 30 years, he said, helping Nayeli mount. "She might not even be alive." "She lives," Nayeli replied with that same unsettling certainty, "and she has waited for you a very long time." They rode onward through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing from red rock formations to scrubby pine forest as they gained elevation. Ethan maintained a punishing pace, aware that Nayeli's condition was deteriorating, but equally conscious of the danger behind them. The sun had begun its descent when they crested a ridge overlooking a small valley. Eagle's Nest lay below them, a collection of perhaps 20 structures clustered around a central street, with scattered homesteads in the surrounding area. It had been nearly a decade since Ethan had last visited, but little seemed to have changed. "Not much to look at," he said, but they keep to themselves. Monroe's influence isn't as strong here. Nayeli didn't respond. Ethan turned to find her slumped forward in the saddle, consciousness finally having fled. He cursed under his breath and urged the horses forward, one arm supporting her weight. They descended into the valley as twilight gathered. Ethan avoided the main settlement, steering instead toward a small cabin set apart from the others, nestled against the eastern slope. Smoke rose from its stone chimney, and a single lamp burned in the window, signs of habitation that both relieved and apprehensive him. As they approached, the cabin's door opened. A silhouette appeared, a woman of considerable age but unbent by it, her silver-streaked black hair falling in two long braids. She stood perfectly still, watching their approach with the patience of one accustomed to waiting. Ethan reined in the horses a respectful distance away. "Mary Crow?" he called, his voice carrying in the evening stillness. The woman stepped forward, lamplight falling across features that bridged two bloodlines, the high cheekbones and copper skin of her Apache heritage, the blue-gray eyes of her white father. Those eyes widened as they took in his face. "Ethan Hawke," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for her years. "Sarah's boy. You have your mother's eyes." Her gaze shifted to Nayeli's unconscious form. "And you've brought the Dream Keeper to me at last." "She needs help," Ethan said, avoiding the implications of her words. "She's been stabbed. The wound's infected." Mary Crow nodded once, turning to re-enter the cabin. "Bring her inside. Quickly now." Ethan lifted Nayeli carefully from the saddle, struck again by how light she felt despite her strength. As he carried her across the threshold of Mary's cabin, the old woman watched with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. Sorrow mingled with something like vindication. The cabin's interior was warm and fragrant, with herbs hanging from the rafters. One half followed white settlers' organization, a table, chairs, a cooking hearth. The other displayed Apache influences, woven rugs, painted hides, objects of spiritual significance that Ethan only vaguely recognized. Mary directed him to a narrow bed in the corner. "Lay her there, then fetch water from the spring out back." Ethan complied, grateful for direct instructions that required no confrontation with the questions swirling in his mind. By the time he returned with the water, Mary had cut away Nayeli's bandages and was examining the wound with expert hands. "You stitched this?" she asked, not looking up. "Yes." "Good work, considering, but the infection's deep." She began assembling herbs and powders from various containers. "She's strong or she'd be dead already. The journey nearly killed her." "We had no choice. Monroe's men—" "I know about Thaddeus Monroe," Mary interrupted, her voice hardening. "The so-called judge has brought nothing but suffering since he came to these territories." She worked in silence for several minutes, creating a poultice far more complex than Ethan's basic attempt. Her movements were precise, practiced, the accumulated knowledge of two healing traditions combined. "You have questions," she said finally, applying the mixture to Nayeli's wound. "More than I can count." Ethan leaned against the far wall, maintaining distance, both physical and emotional. "She claims to have dreamed about me. Says she knows things no one could know. Dreamkeepers see beyond ordinary boundaries." Mary began rewrapping the wound with clean bandages. "Nayeli is the last of her line. The gift runs strong in her. She also claims my mother wasn't who I thought she was, that she lived with the Apache, created some song with your people." He watched Mary's reaction carefully. "Is there any truth to that?" Mary finished her work and straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "Your father lied to you, Ethan, about your mother, about her death, about many things." The blunt confirmation struck harder than he'd expected. Why would he do that? Fear, shame, perhaps in his way, protection. She gestured to a chair. "Sit. This is a long story and you look ready to fall." Ethan remained standing. "I need the simple version. Is what Nayeli says true? Was my mother involved with the Apache? Is there really some mystical valley Monroe is after?" "Yes to all three." Mary's expression softened slightly. "Sarah Hawke was a remarkable woman who saw beyond the hatred between our peoples. She lived among the Apache for 3 years before meeting your father. Even after marrying him, she maintained connections with us, especially with my mother, who was Dreamkeeper before Nayeli's grandmother." She moved to a wooden chest in the corner, opening it to remove a bundle wrapped in deerskin. Together, they created the soul's melody, a song of power meant to heal the divisions between our peoples and bring peace to those who died in the conflicts. It's just a song, Ethan said, though doubt colored his voice. No song is just a song, boy. Mary unwrapped the bundle, revealing yellowed sheets of paper covered in handwriting he instantly recognized, his mother's flowing script. Music carries power beyond words. The soul's melody was designed to be sung at Echo Valley, where the acoustics create something extraordinary, something that allows communication between the living and the dead. Ethan's rational mind rejected the concept immediately, but deeper instincts responded to the certainty in Mary's voice. And Monroe believes this valley contains gold. Monroe believes whatever feeds his greed. Mary rewrapped the papers carefully. Echo Valley holds no metal wealth, but it contains something far more valuable. Healing waters that flow only when the soul's melody is sung under the full moon. Waters that can cure ailments of both body and spirit. She looked directly at him. Waters that might wash away the curse you believe you carry. Ethan stiffened. Nayeli told you about that. She didn't need to. I see it in how you hold yourself apart, even now. Mary's gaze was uncomfortably perceptive. The belief that everyone you care for dies because of that caring. It's a heavy burden to bear, especially alone. It's not a belief, it's experience. Ethan's voice hardened. Everyone I've ever... He stopped, unwilling to continue. Everyone dies eventually, Ethan. Caring for them doesn't cause it. It only makes the loss harder to bear. Mary gestured to Nayeli's unconscious form. She came looking for you because she believes you're meant to complete what your mother started. The full moon is in 4 days. Echo Valley lies 2 days' ride north from here. I never agreed to go that far. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. I got her to you. That's enough. Is it? Mary's voice remained gentle. You carried her across your threshold. You fought to keep her alive. You risked Monroe's wrath to bring her here. Those aren't the actions of a man who believes he's done enough. Before Ethan could respond, Nayeli stirred, her eyes opening. They focused first on Mary, recognition and respect evident in her expression. Elder, she whispered. Rest, child, Mary replied in Apache. You're safe for now. Nayeli's gaze shifted to Ethan, standing apart in the shadows. You stayed. Something in her simple observation, the lack of surprise, the quiet acknowledgement, unsettled him deeply. As if she had always known he wouldn't abandon her, even when he himself hadn't been certain. Don't read too much into it, he said gruffly. We're not out of danger yet. A faint smile touched her lips before her eyes closed again. Mary checked her forehead, nodding with satisfaction. The fever's breaking. She'll need tonight to recover, but by morning she should be strong enough to travel. She fixed Ethan with a pointed look. Which gives you time to decide what happens next. There's nothing to decide. Monroe will be searching every settlement in the territory. We need to keep moving. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Mary crossed to a cabinet, removing 3 small glasses and a bottle of amber liquid. She poured measures into each, offering one to Ethan. The question isn't whether you'll continue running. It's whether you're running from something or towards something. Ethan accepted the glass but didn't drink. Philosophy doesn't change the fact that Monroe wants her dead, and me along with her. No, but it changes how you face that fact. Mary raised her glass in a silent toast to the 3rd glass she'd poured, for Nayeli, though the woman couldn't partake. Your mother believes some journeys choose us, not the other way around. This one has chosen you, Ethan. The only choice left is how you walk it. Ethan stared into the amber liquid, seeing reflections of firelight like trapped spirits. Everything in him resisted Mary's words. The mysticism, the suggestion of destiny, the implication that his carefully constructed isolation had always been temporary. And yet, a small voice whispered that perhaps Nayeli was right. Perhaps this moment had been waiting for him all along. He raised his glass and drank, the whiskey burning a path down his throat. Tell me about my mother, he said finally. Tell me the truth. Mary's eyes softened. She settled into her chair, cradling her glass between weathered hands. Sarah Hawk came west as a scholar, not a settler's wife, she began. She studied our ways when others sought to destroy them. She learned our songs when others tried to silence them. And she died not from fever, but from a bullet meant for an Apache child she was protecting. The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of revelation spreading outward. Ethan sat heavily in the chair opposite Mary, his carefully constructed understanding of his past crumbling beneath a simple truth spoken in a quiet cabin. "Who killed her?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Mary's eyes held his, unflinching in the firelight. "Thaddeus Monroe." Ethan's world tilted on its axis as Mary's words hung in the stillness between them. "That's impossible," he finally managed. "Monroe would have been barely more than a boy when my mother died." "Thaddeus Monroe was 22 in 1856, Mary replied, her voice steady as a river current. "Already ambitious, already cruel. He led a group of settlers who called themselves the Purifiers, young men who believed the only good Apache was a dead one." She traced the rim of her glass with one weathered finger. "Your mother had established a small school near the reservation boundary. She taught children from both worlds, settler and Apache alike. Monroe saw this as contamination, a weakening of the natural order." The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across Mary's face. Outside, night had fully claimed the valley, wrapping the cabin in darkness broken only by scattered stars. One night, Monroe and his men attacked an Apache family traveling to the school. Your mother intervened, hiding a young girl in her wagon. When Monroe discovered this betrayal, as he saw it, he shot Sarah in cold blood. Mary's eyes reflected firelight and ancient pain. "The girl escaped. I was that girl, Ethan." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Ethan stared at the woman before him, the living connection to a past he'd never known, a debt he'd never realized. "My father told me she died of fever," he said, his voice hollow. "Your father arrived too late to save her, but in time to hear her final words. He killed 2 of Monroe's men before the others fled." Mary's gaze never wavered. "He made a choice that night, to protect you from the truth, to raise you away from the conflict that took your mother. He should have told me." Anger rose in Ethan's chest, directed at a man long dead. "Perhaps, but grief makes cowards of even brave men." Mary set down her empty glass. "Monroe's family had power even then. Your father feared that pursuing justice would only lead to your death as well. So he created a simpler story, a story of natural death, not murder." Ethan rose from his chair, too restless to remain seated. The cabin suddenly felt confining, the weight of revelation pressing in from all sides. "Monroe must know who I am," he said. "If he killed my mother—" "Monroe has killed many people's mothers," Mary interrupted gently. "You were 8 years old. He likely never connected the bitter cavalry scout with the child of Sarah Hawk." The logic made sense, yet something felt incomplete. "And now, all these years later, he's after Nayeli in this valley. That can't be coincidence. The universe works in patterns, not coincidences." Mary's gaze drifted to Nayeli's sleeping form. "The dreamkeeper dreamed of you for a reason. The song calls for completion. The past reaches for resolution." Ethan made a dismissive sound. "Mystical nonsense." "Is it?" Mary challenged. "You've spent your life running from connection, believing yourself cursed to bring death to those you care for. Yet here you stand, drawn into the very story your mother left unfinished." She rose with surprising grace for her age, crossing to a small chest near her bed. From it, she withdrew a leather-bound journal. "Your mother's," she explained, holding it out. "She documented everything, her time with our people, the creation of the soul's melody, her understanding of Echo Valley's power. I've kept it safe, waiting for the day her son might claim his inheritance." Ethan hesitated before taking the journal, as if it might burn to the touch. The leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed but well preserved. His mother's handwriting filled every page, a ghost speaking across decades. "Read it," Mary urged, "then decide your path. I'm going to check on our horses and set awards around the property. Monroe's men won't find us tonight, but we should be prepared regardless." She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out into the darkness, leaving Ethan alone with his mother's words and the sleeping Nayeli. For several minutes, he simply held the journal, afraid to open it. To read these pages was to meet a mother he'd never truly known, to confront a history purposefully hidden from him. Finally, drawing a deep breath, he opened to the first page. April 15th, 1853. I have been accepted among the people. Their initial suspicion has given way to cautious welcome. The dreamkeeper, Waking Bird, has taken particular interest in my studies. She says I have old eyes and a young face. I'm not certain if this is compliment or concern. Ethan turned the pages slowly, absorbing his mother's observations from over 30 years ago, her growing understanding of Apache culture, her deep friendship with the dreamkeeper. The woman in these pages was not the gentle, somewhat passive mother of his childhood memories, but a passionate scholar, a bridge builder between worlds, a woman of remarkable courage. February 3rd, 1854. Waking Bird has shared something extraordinary with me today. A vision of a valley where the boundaries between worlds grow thin, where voices of the departed can be heard in the wind. The Apache have known of this place for generations, but keep its location secret. She says few outsiders have ever been permitted to visit Echo Valley, but she will take me when the moon is full. As he read further, the pieces began to align. His mother and Waking Bird had discovered that the valley's acoustic properties created an unusual phenomenon. When certain tones were sung in specific locations, the water in the central pool would vibrate and release minerals with remarkable healing properties. The two women had spent months developing a song that would activate the waters fully, the soul's melody. October 12th, 1854. We have completed the soul's melody at last. Waking Bird insists we divide the song between us for safekeeping. She foresees a time of great violence coming, when knowledge of the valley might be exploited by those who see only material wealth. The song must remain incomplete until a time when both peoples are ready to heal together. Ethan paused at an entry that made his heart constrict. May 30th, 1855. I met a man today, William Hawk. He has kind eyes and steady hands. He doesn't look at my interest in the Apache with the same disgust as other settlers. When he smiles, I can imagine a different future than the solitary path I had accepted. His father, the young man who had courted and won his scholarly mother, who had later hidden her true nature from their son. The final entries grew increasingly urgent, as if his mother sensed her time growing short. March 18th, 1856. Ethan is growing stronger each day. When I look at him, I see hope for a future where the divisions between our peoples might heal. He has William's strength and my curiosity. I pray he will know both worlds as I have. April 2nd, 1856. Rumors of violence grow. A group calling themselves the Purifiers has been harassing Apache families. Their leader, a young man named Monroe, speaks of cleansing the territory. I fear for my students, for my friends. William wants us to leave, but how can I abandon those who have become family? The final entry was dated just 3 days before her death. April 27th, 1856. I had a strange dream last night. Ethan as a man standing in Echo Valley singing the soul's melody as the moon rose. Beside him stood a woman bearing the mark of the dreamkeeper. Together they completed what Waking Bird and I began. I woke with tears on my face but peace in my heart. Whatever comes, the song will find its voice someday. Ethan closed the journal, his vision blurred. The woman in these pages had foreseen her own son's journey decades before Nayeli dreamed of him, had seen hope where he had only found isolation and bitterness. She knew. The soft voice startled him. Nayeli had awakened, her dark eyes reflecting firelight as she watched him from the bed. Your mother saw the pattern before it formed, she continued, her voice stronger than he expected. Just as my grandmother saw it. Just as I have seen it. Ethan returned the journal to its place on the chest, needing distance from its revelations. Coincidence and wishful thinking, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Is that truly what you believe? Nayeli attempted to sit up, wincing slightly. After everything you've read? What I believe doesn't change our situation. Ethan brought her a cup of water, helping her drink. Monroe wants you dead in this valley found. Those are facts, not mysticism. While the facts and the mysticism are intertwined. She held his gaze. Monroe doesn't just want wealth. He wants to erase the shame of his past failures. The families he couldn't purify, the Apache who survived his raids. Finding Echo Valley would make him not just rich, but vindicated in his belief that everything can be conquered, everything can be owned. Her words struck uncomfortably close to the truth Ethan had sensed. Monroe's pursuit felt personal, Obsessive, not merely the greed of a man seeking gold. Can you travel tomorrow? He asked, changing the subject. Yes, Nayeli handed back the empty cup. Mary's medicine is strong. By morning, I will be well enough to ride. Good. We'll head north at first light. If we push hard, we can reach the mountain passes by nightfall. And then? Ethan hesitated. The rational choice was still to get Nayeli to safety and walk away. Let her find Echo Valley with her people's help. Let her sing her mystical song without him. His mother's journal had moved him, yes, but emotion wasn't reason enough to believe in sacred valleys and healing waters. Yet the final entry haunted him. His mother had seen him there, had died believing he would someday complete what she had begun. We'll see, he said finally, one day at a time. Nayeli studied him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. You still resist what you know to be true. And what's that? That you were meant to find me, that we are bound by more than chance, her voice softened, that the curse you carry is a shield you created, not a sentence passed upon you. Ethan turned away, uncomfortable with her insight. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be hard riding. He moved to the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. Behind him, he heard Nayeli settling back onto the bed, her breathing gradually evening into sleep. The night pressed against the glen, vast and indifferent to human concerns. Somewhere out there, Monroe's men were searching, driven by greed and old hatreds. And somewhere to the north lay a valley his mother had visited, had written about with wonder and hope. A valley where the dead could speak if one knew how to listen. Despite himself, Ethan wondered what his mother might say if such things were possible. Dawn arrived with a palette of crimson and gold, painting the eastern ridges in fire. Mary had returned sometime in the night, now busied herself preparing provisions for their journey. Nayeli sat at the table, pale but upright, sipping a steaming herbal tea. The fever's gone, Mary informed Ethan as he joined them. The wound is clean. She'll need to be careful, but she can ride. Monroe's men? He asked. Had passed through the settlement last night, 4 riders asking questions at the saloon. Mary wrapped in corn cakes and jerky and oilcloth. They're heading east. Seems they're still following your false trail. It won't fool them long. Long enough, perhaps. Mary handed him the bundle of food. I've added medicines and bandages. Changed Nayeli's dressing tonight. Ethan nodded, acknowledging both the instructions and the assumption behind them, that he would continue the journey north with Nayeli, at least for another day. You read the journal, Mary said, not a question. Yes. And Ethan glanced at Nayeli, who watched their exchange with quiet attention. It raises more questions than it answers. Mary smiled faintly. Truth often does. She crossed to the chest where she'd stored the journal, withdrawing a small leather pouch. From it, she removed yellowed pages covered in his mother's handwriting. The other half of the soul's melody, she explained. The English verses Sarah wrote to complement the Apache. Together with what Nayeli carries, they form the complete song. She offered the pages to Ethan. He hesitated, then took them, carefully storing them in his inside pocket. I'm not promising anything, he said. The universe doesn't require promises, Mary replied. Mom, only choices, made one moment at a time. She turned to Nayeli, speaking briefly in Apache. The younger woman nodded, her expression solemn. Mary embraced her, then surprised Ethan by embracing him as well. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become, she whispered, even with your walls and scars. Before he could respond to this unexpected sentiment, she stepped back. The horses are ready. You should leave now while the day is young. Outside, Ethan found their mounts prepared, saddlebags filled with supplies. He helped Nayeli mount, noting that she moved with more strength than the previous day, though caution still marked her movements. As he swung into his own saddle, Mary approached with a final offering, a Winchester rifle. This was your father's, she said. He left it with me after Sarah died, said he couldn't bear to look at it, knowing he'd used it too late. Ethan accepted the weapon, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. Thank you. Mary nodded once. Follow the North Star Ridge Trail. It's longer but less traveled. May the ancestors guide your path. With those parting words, they rode out, leaving Eagle's Nest behind as the morning sun climbed higher. Ethan led them north along game trails rather than established paths, constantly alert for signs of pursuit. Nayeli rode silently beside him, conserving her strength. By midday, they had gained significant elevation, the forest thickening around them as they entered mountain terrain. They paused in a small clearing to rest the horses and eat. "How's your wound?" Ethan asked, breaking the long silence between them. "Healing." Nayeli accepted the water he offered. "Mary's medicine is powerful. She seems to think you are pretty powerful yourself." He studied her openly for the first time since their journey began. "This dreamkeeper role, what exactly does it entail?" Nayeli considered before answering. "We are the memory of our people, the connection between past, present, and future. Through dreams. Through dreams, yes, but also through the stories we keep, the songs we remember, the patterns we recognize." She touched the tattoo at the nape of her neck. "Each dream keeper receives this mark when the weft manifests, usually in childhood. The dreams come first as fragments, then as clear visions, sometimes of what has been, sometimes of what might be. And you've dreamed of me since you were a child." Ethan's tone carried skepticism. "Since I was 7 years old." Her gaze was unwavering. "At first, I saw only a man with pale eyes standing in Echo Valley. As I grew older, the dreams became clearer. I saw your time in the cavalry, your refusal to lead the raid, the child you saved. I saw your solitary years in the canyon. Convenient that your dreams contained so much detail about me, but didn't warn you about Monroe's attack on your people." Pain flashed across her features. "The dreams show what they show. I saw danger coming, but not its exact form. I warned the elders, but we had few options. The reservation left us exposed, vulnerable." Ethan regretted his harshness. "I didn't mean—" "You did," she interrupted without anger. "You search for reasons to dismiss what unsettles you. It is understandable." The simple acceptance in her voice made him more uncomfortable than any accusation. He busied himself checking the horse's tack, avoiding her perceptive gaze. "We should keep moving," he said finally. "Still a long way to the passes." They mounted and continued their journey, the terrain growing steadily more challenging. Pine forest gave way to rocky slopes and narrow trails where they had to ride single file. Ethan remained vigilant, frequently stopping to check for signs of pursuit. But the wilderness remained still, except for the occasional cry of a hawk or rustle of small game. As afternoon stretched toward evening, they crested a ridge that offered a sweeping view of the territories. Miles below, Eagle's Nest was barely visible, a tiny cluster of structures in the vastness. Beyond it lay Shadow Canyon, where Ethan's cabin stood empty, and farther still, the reservations where Nayeli's people had been confined. "So much land," Nayeli murmured, "yet never enough, according to the white man's hunger." Ethan had no answer to this simple truth. He had seen the progression himself. Territories claimed, treaties signed and broken, more land demanded. An endless appetite that seemed to define his people's relationship with this continent. "There's a sheltered spot about 2 miles ahead," he said instead. "We'll camp there for the night." The site he remembered was a small box canyon with a spring-fed pool and enough grazing for the horses. High walls provided protection from the wind and limited approaches to a single narrow entrance that could be easily monitored. They reached it as the last light faded from the sky. While Nayeli tended the horses, Ethan gathered wood and built a small fire, careful to keep it low and well shielded to prevent the light from being visible from a distance. The nights at this elevation were cold, especially as autumn advanced. "I need to check your wound," he said as they finished a sparse meal of jerky and corn cakes. Nayeli nodded, turning slightly and lowering her buckskin top enough to expose the bandaged area. Ethan worked carefully, removing the soiled dressing and cleaning the wound with water from the spring. Mary's medicine had worked remarkably. The angry red inflammation had subsided, the edges of the wound beginning to knit together. "Healing well," he observed, applying the fresh poultice Mary had provided. "Another day or two and you might not need bandages." "Your hands are gentle," Nayeli said quietly. "Like your mother's were, according to Mary." Ethan's fingers stilled momentarily at the comparison. "I wouldn't know." "She was a healer too, not just of bodies, but of divisions between people. So I gather from her journal." He finished securing the new bandage and moved back, restoring a comfortable distance between them. "You can fix your clothing." Nayeli adjusted her top, then surprised him by asking, May I see your scar? The one on your chest. The request caught him off guard. Why? Because you hide it. Because it represents the moment you decided to live. Yet you carry it as a mark of shame rather than survival. Her insight was too accurate for comfort. The scar, self-inflicted in a moment of despair after the Apache village raid, was his most private wound, both physically and emotionally. It's not something I show people, he said stiffly. I am not people, she replied. I am the one who has carried your image in my dreams since childhood, the one who knows your burdens without being told. The firelight caught the angles of her face, highlighting the quiet determination in her expression. Something in her steadfast gaze broke through his customary defenses. With deliberate movements, Ethan unbuttoned his shirt part-way, exposing a jagged scar that ran 3 inches below his heart. A knife wound that would have been fatal had his hand not faltered at the last moment. Nayeli studied it without speaking, then reached out slowly, giving him time to withdraw. When he remained still, she gently traced the scar with her fingertips. The touch was feather-light, yet seemed to burn through him. This is where the curse began for you, she said softly. Not with your mother's death, but here. You survived when you wished to die, and something in you decided that survival came at a price. The lives of those you might care for. Ethan couldn't speak past the tightness in his throat. Her words had stripped away decades of carefully constructed justifications, laying bare the truth he had never fully acknowledged, even to himself. There is no curse, Ethan Hawke, Nayeli continued, her hand still resting over his scar. Only a man who chose to live, but feared to discover why he was spared. The moment stretched between them, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical proximity. Then Nayeli withdrew her hand and Ethan rebuttoned his shirt, struggling to rebuild the walls her words had so effortlessly dismantled. I'll take first watch, he said, his voice rougher than intended. You should rest. If she was disappointed by his retreat, she didn't show it. Wake me at midnight. You need rest as well. She settled near the fire, using her saddle as a pillow and Ethan's spare blanket for warmth. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into sleep, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the vast canopy of stars overhead. Ethan positioned himself near the canyon's entrance, Winchester across his lap, his back against a boulder. The night sounds of the mountains surrounded him, the soft calls of owls, the distant yip of coyotes, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Familiar sounds that had accompanied his solitude for years. Yet tonight that solitude felt different, disrupted not just by Nayeli's physical presence, but by the space she seemed to be creating within him, space for questions he'd avoided, for possibilities he'd rejected. He found himself thinking of his mother's journal, of the woman who had bridged worlds and believed in healing ancient wounds, of her dream of her son standing in Echo Valley, completing what she had begun. Had she truly foreseen this journey, or had her hope simply created a comforting fantasy in her final days? And what of his father, who had hidden the truth of her murder? Who had raised his son with no knowledge of his mother's work, her beliefs, her death at Monroe's hands? Was it truly protection, as Mary suggested, or something more selfish, a desire to shape his son without the complications of his mother's legacy? The questions circled without resolution as the night deepened. Above him, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow comforting in their constancy. Near midnight, as he prepared to wake Nayeli for her watch, a sound froze him in place, the distant but unmistakable clink of metal against stone. Someone was approaching the canyon, moving with care but not silently enough. Ethan glided to Nayeli's side, covering her mouth gently as he woke her. Her eyes opened instantly, alert despite the sudden awakening. Riders, he whispered, at least 2, maybe more, coming up the trail. She nodded her understanding, reaching for the pistol he'd given her earlier. They doused the fire quickly, gathering only essential supplies. The horses, thankfully, were already saddled, as Ethan never fully unpacked when in uncertain territory. There's another way out, he murmured, leading her to the back of the canyon. Narrow path, locals don't know about it. The path was indeed narrow, barely wide enough for a horse to navigate, and climbed steeply up the canyon's rear wall. Under normal circumstances, Ethan would never have attempted it in darkness, but necessity overruled caution. They led the horses on foot, moving as quietly as possible over loose shale that threatened to announce their passage with every step. Behind them, voices became audible. Men entering the canyon, discovering the recently abandoned campsite. Orders were given, angry and urgent. Someone fired a shot into the darkness, the sound echoing against the canyon walls. "They'll find the path soon," Ethan whispered. "We need to move faster." They mounted once the trail widened slightly, urging the horses upward at a pace that bordered on reckless. The animals sensed their riders' urgency, picking their way over treacherous terrain with remarkable sure-footedness. They had nearly reached the ridge when a shout confirmed their worst fears. The pursuers had found the hidden trail. Moments later, gunfire erupted, bullets whining off rocks uncomfortably close to their position. "Ride," Ethan commanded, returning fire to provide cover as Nayeli urged her horse over the ridge. He followed seconds later, both of them leaning low over their mounts' necks as they galloped across the exposed ridgeline. The next hours passed in a blur of hard riding through unfamiliar territory. Ethan led them through a maze of ravines and narrow passes, doubling back occasionally to ensure they weren't being followed directly. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with approaching dawn, they had put significant distance between themselves and their pursuers. They finally stopped in a dense stand of pines, both riders and horses exhausted. Ethan dismounted stiffly, helping Nayeli down. Her face was drawn with pain and fatigue, but she made no complaint. "Let me check your wound," he said, concerned the rough ride might have reopened it. "It held," she replied, though she didn't resist when he insisted on examining the bandages. True to her word, the wound remained closed, though fresh bruising surrounded the area. Ethan replaced the bandage with the last of their clean dressings, his movements efficient despite his own exhaustion. "How did they find us?" Nayeli asked as he worked. "Someone in Eagle's Nest must have talked. Or they had better trackers than I gave them credit for." Ethan secured the bandage. "Either way, they're persistent. Monroe wants Echo Valley badly." "Monroe wants you badly," Ethan corrected. "The valley is secondary." Nayeli frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about it all night. This isn't just about gold or treasure. It's personal for him." Ethan sat back on his heels. Monroe made his reputation pacifying the Apache territories. "Your people." But there were always those who escaped him, who survived despite his best efforts. The dream keepers especially, the spiritual leaders who kept your culture alive. Understanding dawned in Nayeli's eyes. He wants to erase what he couldn't conquer. Exactly. Finding Echo Valley, exploiting it for wealth, that's part of it. But capturing or killing the last dreamkeeper? That would be the final victory in a campaign he's waged for decades. "A campaign that began with killing your mother," Nayeli added softly. Ethan nodded, the connection crystallizing as he spoke. "She represented everything he hated. Cooperation between our peoples. Respect for Apache culture and beliefs. Her death was his first significant act as a purifier. And now her son protects the last dreamkeeper." Nayeli's gaze held his. The pattern completes itself. Ethan wanted to dismiss the mystical interpretation, but found he couldn't. Whether by design or chance, he had indeed been drawn into a conflict that began before his birth, a conflict that had shaped his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. "We need to keep moving," he said, rising. "The full moon is tomorrow night. If we're going to reach Echo Valley by then, we can't afford to rest long." "Then we'll reach it," Nayeli said with quiet certainty. "The ancestors have waited too long for the soul's melody to be sung again." They mounted and continued northward as the sun climbed higher, leaving the pine forest behind for more rugged, exposed terrain. The mountains rose before them, ancient sentinels with secrets hidden in their folds. Somewhere among them lay Echo Valley, waiting for a song divided between two peoples, a healing promised decades ago by a scholar and a dream keeper who believed in a better future. Ethan found himself wondering what that future might look like, and more surprisingly, whether he might have a place in it. By mid-afternoon, they had entered the true mountains, a landscape of towering peaks, hidden valleys, and winding trails that disappeared into mist. The air grew thinner, each breath more labored. The horses struggled on the steeper inclines, forcing them to dismount and lead the animals for long stretches. "We're close," Nayeli said as they paused at a stream to rest. "I can feel it." Ethan glanced at her sharply. "You've been here before?" "Never physically, but in dreams many times." She cupped water in her hands, drinking deeply. The valley lies beyond the next ridge, nestled between three peaks, the Trident, the locals call them. Ethan had heard of the formation, three jagged summits of nearly identical height, arranged in a perfect line. Few settlers ventured that far into the mountains, considering the area worthless for farming or ranching. Even miners had largely ignored it, finding more accessible deposits elsewhere. The perfect place to hide something of value, whether gold or something less tangible. "How's your side?" he asked, noting the careful way she moved. "Painful but bearable." Nayeli straightened. "I won't slow us down." "That's not what I asked." A faint smile touched her lips. "You're concerned. That's progress." Ethan looked away, uncomfortable with the observation. "We should reach the ridge before nightfall. Best to approach the valley in daylight tomorrow." They continued their journey, the trail growing fainter as they ventured into territory rarely traversed by humans. The silence deepened, broken only by the occasional cry of an eagle or the distant rumble of falling rock. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as they climbed higher. Late afternoon found them ascending the final approach to the ridge that separated them from Echo Valley. The trail had all but disappeared, forcing them to pick their way through boulder fields and along narrow ledges. Ethan led the way, testing each step before committing, hyper-aware that a single misstep could be fatal. "There," Nayeli said suddenly, pointing ahead, "the Guardian Stones." Ethan followed her gesture and saw what he might otherwise have mistaken for a natural formation. Two tall stones flanking a narrow passage through the ridge. As they drew closer, he realized the stones had been positioned deliberately, their inner faces bearing weathered carvings nearly obliterated by time and elements. "Apache markers?" he asked. "Older," Nayeli replied. "From before my people claimed these mountains. The ancestors recognized the valley's power and marked it for those who would come later." They passed between the stones, Ethan suppressing a shiver as they crossed this ancient threshold. The passage beyond widened into a natural amphitheater of stone, offering their first view of what lay beyond. Echo Valley spread below them, a hidden paradise nestled among harsh peaks. The valley floor flourished green, fed by streams that joined at a central pool. Even from this distance, water sounds enveloped them as if the valley itself breathed, a hint of the acoustic magic that gave the place its name. "It's real," Ethan murmured, the sight momentarily overwhelming his skepticism. "Did you doubt?" Nayeli stood beside him, her expression serene despite the difficult journey. "I doubt everything I haven't seen with my own eyes." Yet even as he spoke, Ethan recognized the inadequacy of sight alone to comprehend this place. There was something more here, a presence, a significance that transcended the physical beauty. They made camp in the amphitheater, protected from the wind and with clear views of any approach from below. As darkness fell, the stars emerged with startling clarity in the thin mountain air, their light casting pale shadows across the stone. Nayeli sat near their small fire, removing the leather pouch that contained her half of the soul's melody. Ethan hesitated, then joined her, withdrawing the pages Mary had given him. "Tomorrow night the moon will be full," Nayeli said quietly. "We should practice the song before then. It must be sung precisely to awaken the waters." Ethan stiffened. "I told you, I don't sing." "Everyone sings. Some have simply forgotten how." Her dark eyes reflected firelight. "Your mother's journal mentioned that she sang to you as a child, that you had a clear, pure voice." The memory surfaced unbidden, his mother's gentle hand stroking his hair, her voice weaving stories and melodies in the twilight. The comfort of those moments, lost for so many years beneath grief and anger. "That was a long time ago," he said roughly. "Some things, once learned, are never truly forgotten." Nayeli placed her pages beside his. The Apache verses intertwine with the English. The song is incomplete without both voices, just as healing is incomplete when only one side remembers. The symbolism was heavy-handed but undeniably powerful. Ethan found himself studying the unfamiliar Apache script alongside his mother's elegant handwriting, seeing how they were meant to complement each other. "Start with me," Nayeli encouraged. "Just the first verse." Her voice rose into the stillness, soft but clear, singing words in her native tongue that spoke of mountains remembering, of waters that carried the voices of those gone before. When she nodded to him, Ethan reluctantly joined, his voice rusty from disuse, but finding the melody with surprising ease. Soft sunlight broke through the cabin's single window, dust motes dancing like spirits in the air. Remember, child, the morning brings renewal, the darkness yields to light, despair to prayer. Their voices blended into harmonies that lingered in the air. The sound bounced off stone walls, amplified until ghostly voices seemed to join them from across time. Ethan faltered. What is that? The valley recognizes the song, Nayeli explained. Tomorrow at the central pool beneath the full moon, the effect will be much stronger. And what exactly is supposed to happen then? The waters will awaken. Those who have died in violence will find voice, and healing will flow for those with courage to receive it. She gathered the pages carefully. Both physical healing for wounds of the body and deeper healing for wounds of the spirit. Ethan's hand moved unconsciously toward his chest, toward the self-inflicted scar that marked his darkest moment. You really believe this, don't you? I know it, Nayeli replied simply. As did your mother. As do you, though you fight against the knowledge. He had no answer to this quiet certainty. Instead, he rose, moving to the edge of their camp to stare out at the valley below, silvered now by starlight. Tomorrow night, they would descend into that otherworldly place and attempt a ritual conceived by his mother and Nayeli's grandmother decades ago, a ritual meant to heal ancient wounds between their peoples. Part of him still resisted, still clung to rational skepticism. But another part, long suppressed, remembered his mother's voice and the comfort it had brought. Remembered the strange resonance he'd felt when their voices joined in song moments ago. Remembered the dream his mother had recorded in her final journal entry. Her son, standing in Echo Valley, completing what she had begun. Perhaps after a lifetime of running from connection, it was time to stand and face what he had been avoiding. Not just Monroe and his men, but the possibility that his mother had been right, that healing was possible, that the curse he believed himself to carry was, as Nayeli suggested, a shield he had created to protect himself from further loss. Behind him, Nayeli's voice rose once more in soft song, not the soul's melody this time, but a simpler Apache lullaby. The gentle notes drifted around him like a physical embrace, offering comfort without demand. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan allowed himself to receive it. Dawn broke over the eastern peaks in a blaze of gold and crimson, painting the valley below in ethereal light. Ethan had been awake for hours, keeping vigil from his position on a rocky outcrop. The night had passed without sign of pursuit, but experience had taught him that safety was always temporary, peace always provisional. Nayeli joined him as the sun cleared the horizon, moving with more strength than he'd seen since their journey began. Mary's medicine in the valley's proximity seemed to have accelerated her healing. It calls to you, doesn't it? She asked, gazing at the landscape spread beneath them. Ethan didn't answer immediately. The truth was he had felt something during his night watch, a subtle pull, an inexplicable familiarity, as if some part of him recognized this place despite never having seen it before. We should reach the valley floor by midday, he said instead, avoiding her question. That'll give us time to find the central pool before moonrise. Nayeli accepted his deflection with a knowing glance. The pool lies where all streams converge. According to tradition, we must arrive before sunset to prepare. Prepare how? Purification, prayer. The soul's melody requires clear intentions. She turned to face him fully. Are your intentions clear, Ethan Hawke? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Were his intentions clear? Even now, poised above Echo Valley with his mother's song in his pocket, Ethan wasn't certain what drove him. Curiosity? Obligation? A deeper yearning he refused to name? Clear enough, he said finally. I'll get you safely to this pool. After that, we'll see. Still leaving room to run. Her observation held no judgment, just quiet understanding. They broke camp efficiently, loading the horses with practiced movements that required little conversation. As they prepared to descend into the valley, Ethan made one final sweep of their surroundings, scanning the rugged terrain they had traversed the day before. A flicker of movement caught his eye, distant but distinct against the gray mountainside. He reached for his spyglass, focusing on the disturbance. Riders. At least 4, possibly more, picking their way along the same trail Ethan and Nayeli had followed. Their progress was slow but determined, led by a figure whose bearing was unmistakable even at this distance. Straight-backed, commanding. Judge Monroe himself had joined the pursuit. "We have company," Ethan said, passing the spyglass to Nayeli. "Monroe and his men, about half a day behind us." She observed them briefly, her expression hardening. "He comes himself. The valley must be even more important to him than I realized." "Or you are." Ethan took back the spyglass, collapsing it with a sharp movement. "Either way, we need to move. The valley might provide better cover and more defensible positions if it comes to a fight." They mounted and began the steep descent toward Echo Valley, following a narrow game trail that switched back down the ridge. The terrain demanded their full attention. Loose shale, unexpected drop-offs, sections where the path all but disappeared. One misstep could send horse and rider plummeting hundreds of feet. Yet despite these dangers, Ethan found himself increasingly distracted by the valley itself. As they drew closer, its unique properties became more evident. Sounds carried strangely, sometimes muffled, sometimes amplified. The air felt different, heavier, charged with an energy he couldn't identify. And there was something about the quality of light, a crystalline clarity that made every detail of the landscape stand out in sharp relief. "The boundary thins here," Nayeli said, noticing his reaction. "Between worlds, between times. That's why the ancestors chose this place for communion with those who have passed." "You make it sound like a ghost story," Ethan replied, though the usual edge of skepticism had dulled in his voice. "Not ghosts, memories, echoes, the impression of souls upon the fabric of existence." She guided her horse carefully around a boulder. In the pool at the center, those impressions become visible, audible, for those with the courage to listen. Ethan fell silent, uncomfortably aware that his rationality was eroding with each step deeper into the valley. Things he would have dismissed as superstition days ago now seemed, if not plausible, at least worthy of consideration. Was it the valley's influence, Nayeli's, or something changing within himself? By midday, they reached the valley floor, entering a landscape unlike any Ethan had encountered in his extensive travels. Despite its high elevation, Echo Valley supported lush vegetation, not the expected alpine flora, but plants that shouldn't thrive at this altitude. Willows lined the numerous streams, their leaves shimmering silver green in the sunlight. Meadows of tall grass rippled in gentle breezes that seemed to whisper as they passed. They followed the largest stream toward the valley center, the waterway gradually widening as others joined it. The sound of flowing water surrounded them, sometimes seeming to come from directions where no stream existed, one of the acoustic anomalies that had given the valley its name. "There," Nayeli said, pointing ahead as they rounded a bend, "the heart of echoes." The central pool spread before them, a perfect circle of still water, perhaps 50 yards across. Unlike the streams that fed it, the pool's surface was mirror smooth, reflecting the sky and surrounding peaks with preternatural clarity. At its center stood a small island dominated by a single standing stone, its surface covered in carvings too distant to decipher. "The singing stone," Nayeli explained, "where the soul's melody must be performed." Ethan surveyed the area with a tactician's eye, noting approaches, cover, potential defensive positions. The open ground surrounding the pool offered little protection, but the numerous streams created natural barriers that would slow anyone approaching from the ridge. "We'll make camp there," he decided, indicating a small copse of trees near the pool's western edge. "Good visibility, access to water, some cover if Monroe's men find us." They dismounted and established their camp, working with the efficiency of those accustomed to wilderness living. Ethan set small warning markers along likely approach routes, arrangements of stones and twigs that would be disturbed by anyone passing. They wouldn't stop pursuers, but would provide advance notice of approach. As afternoon lengthened toward evening, the valley underwent a subtle transformation. Shadows deepened, taking on an almost tangible quality. The whispers in the grass grew more distinct, occasionally resembling words in languages neither Apache nor English. The air thickened with anticipation, as if the valley itself waited for something momentous. Nayeli felt it too. She had grown increasingly quiet, her movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. As the sun touched the western peaks, she approached Ethan with a small bundle. "It's time to prepare," she said, The purification must be completed before moonrise. Ethan eyed the bundle warily. What does that entail exactly? Cleansing in the waters, prayer, opening ourselves to what the valley offers. She held his gaze steadily. The soul's melody requires truth, Ethan. We cannot approach the singing stone carrying deception, especially self-deception. The implication was clear, and Ethan bristled instinctively. I'm not interested in mystical confessions. Then why are you here? The simple question landed like a physical blow. Why follow me across mountains, risk Monroe's wrath, stand at the threshold of Echo Valley, if not to find something beyond what your eyes can see and your hands can touch? The valley's strange acoustics caught her words, repeating them in fading echoes that seemed to demand an answer. Ethan found himself without ready response, the defenses he'd maintained for decades suddenly insufficient. Why was he here? The question reverberated within him as the sun slipped behind the western ridge, plunging the valley into premature twilight. Stars appeared with startling swiftness, reflected in the pool's still surface until it became difficult to distinguish where water ended and sky began. My mother believed in this place, he said finally. She died because of that belief. I owe it to her to see it through. Is that the only reason? Naomi's voice had gentled, but her gaze remained unwavering. Ethan turned away, unable to face the knowing in her eyes. It's reason enough. Perhaps. She set the bundle beside him. When you're ready, join me at the eastern edge of the pool. The moon will rise there first. She walked away, leaving Ethan alone with his turbulent thoughts. He watched as she approached the water's edge, removed her moccasins, and waded into the shallows. The pool accepted her without a ripple, as if she were affected, welcomed. Ethan remained where he was, the bundle untouched beside him. The valley had grown unnaturally quiet, the earlier whispers silenced as if in deference to the coming ritual. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the shore and his own heartbeat, unnaturally loud in his ears. Then, breaking the stillness, came a new sound, distant but approaching, the rhythmic thud of hooves on hard ground. Ethan was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, moving to higher ground for a better vantage point. From there, he could see them, riders descending the ridge, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Monroe had found them sooner than expected. Naomi, he called, his voice tight with urgency. We have company. She looked up from her position in the water, her expression shifting from spiritual focus to alert awareness. Without hesitation, she waded back to shore, gathering her belongings. How many? She asked as she reached him. At least 6. Monroe's leading them. Ethan checked his ammunition. They'll reach the valley floor within the hour. We need to move. No. The firmness in her voice made him turn. We cannot leave, not now. The full moon rises in less than 2 hours. This is the moment the soul's melody was created for. It's also the moment we might get killed, Ethan countered. Monroe didn't come all this way to listen to us sing. Then we must delay them. Naomi's gaze swept the terrain. The approach to the pool has many streams to cross, narrow points that could be defended. Ethan followed her reasoning, seeing the tactical possibilities. With the right preparation, a single defender could indeed hold off several attackers at certain choke points. But it would be risky, potentially suicidal. I'll buy you time, he said after a moment's consideration. Find a defensible position along their route, slow them down until after moonrise. And if they break through, if you're wounded or killed? Naomi's eyes reflected starlight. The soul's melody requires both voices, your mother's words with my grandmother's. Then we'll have to improvise. Ethan was already gathering additional ammunition. Stay hidden near the pool. If I can't make it back in time, do what you can without me. Naomi caught his arm. There's another way, a better way. I'm listening. The valley itself can help us. She gestured to the pool, the island, the standing stone. These waters respond to sound. The right sounds, amplified by the valley's acoustics, can create effects. What kind of effects? Disorientation, confusion, like a fog descending over the mind. Naomi spoke with absolute conviction. If we begin the preliminary verses now, it will make their approach more difficult. They'll lose direction, become separated. Ethan's rational mind rejected the notion immediately. Yet something else, some deeper instinct, responded to the certainty in her voice. He'd already witnessed the valley's strange acoustic properties. Was it so impossible that sound could be used as a weapon here? Show me, he said. Nayeli retrieved her half of the soul's melody, then led him to the water's edge. We won't sing the full song. That's reserved for the singing stone under moonlight. But certain verses, sung here, will awaken the valley's protective aspects. She handed him the pages Mary had given him. Follow my lead. Let your voice join mine without reservation. Ethan hesitated, years of skepticism warring with immediate necessity. In the distance, Monroe and his men continued their descent, drawing inexorably closer. Nayeli began to sing, her voice rising clear and strong over the waters. The Apache words were foreign to Ethan, but their cadence, their emotional resonance, touched something deep within him. The melody itself seemed to awaken memories, not just of his mother's lullabies, but something older, more primal. When she nodded to him, Ethan joined, his voice hesitant at first, but gaining confidence as the familiar English words flowed. As water reflects the sky above, so hearts reflect what fills them. Remember, child, where hatred dwells, no peace can find its harbor. Their voices blended, Apache and English intertwining. The sound spread across the pool's surface like ripples, but instead of dissipating, they seemed to gather strength, echoing back from distant canyon walls with increased resonance. The effect was immediate and startling. The air above the pool began to shimmer, not with heat, but with something less definable, a distortion of light and sound that spread outward in concentric circles. The whispers in the grass returned, louder now, more insistent, forming a background chorus to their melody. Ethan faltered momentarily, disturbed by the manifestation. But Nayeli's voice steadied him, drawing him back into the song. As they continued, the distortion intensified, spreading beyond the pool to envelop the surrounding meadows. Looking toward the ridge, Ethan saw it engulf the approaching riders. Even at this distance, the effect was visible. The ordered line of horsemen became disorganized, riders turning in apparent confusion. Two separated from the main group, heading in the wrong direction entirely. Others stopped, seemingly disoriented. It's working, Nayeli murmured between verses. The valley responds. They maintained the song for several more minutes until the shimmering distortion covered most of the approaches to the central pool. When they finally stopped, Ethan felt strangely energized despite the effort, as if the singing had fed something in him rather than depleting it. That should slow them considerably, Nayeli said, but not stop them entirely. Monroe's determination is too strong to be fully diverted. Then we prepare for his arrival. Ethan surveyed the area with new eyes, seeing defensive possibilities he hadn't considered before. How long until the moon rises? Less than an hour now. Nayeli gathered the pages carefully. We should complete our preparations for the full ritual. Ethan nodded, his earlier resistance diminished by what he had just witnessed. Whatever Echo Valley was, whatever power it contained, he could no longer dismiss it as mere superstition. Show me what to do, he said. Nayeli's smile was brief but warm. First, the purification. We must enter the waters as we will enter the song, with open hearts and clear intentions. She led him to the eastern edge of the pool, where the first moonlight would touch the surface. There she removed her outer clothing, revealing the simple undergarments she wore beneath. The wound in her side was healing remarkably well, the angry red replaced by new pink tissue. Ethan hesitated, then followed suit, stripping down to his underclothes. The evening air was cool against his skin, raising goose flesh along his arms. The scar on his chest seemed to burn with unusual intensity, as if responding to the valley's energy. The water will be cold, Nayeli warned, but focus on your breath and it will pass quickly. They waded in together, the pool's surface parting around them with barely a ripple. The cold was indeed shocking, driving breath from Ethan's lungs in a sharp gasp. But as Nayeli had promised, the sensation transitioned rapidly from discomfort to something else, a tingling awareness that spread through his body like gentle electricity. Nayeli guided him deeper until the water reached their shoulders. There she turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting starlight. Now we speak our intentions, she said, our truth. The valley hears, and the waters remember. She placed her hands on his shoulders, the touch feather light yet grounding. I, Nayeli, daughter of Red Wolf, last dreamkeeper of my people, come to Echo Valley seeking healing, not for myself alone, but for all who have suffered in the long conflict between our peoples. I bring the words of my grandmother, Waking Bird, to join with those of Sarah Hawk, that the division may end and the healing begin. The simplicity and clarity of her declaration resonated across the water's surface, creating ripples that spread outward before returning, transformed, to wash against them. Nieli's hands remained on his shoulders, her gaze expectant. It was his turn, Ethan realized. His turn to declare an intention he wasn't sure he fully understood. He began, then faltered. What was his intention? What truth could he offer this place that seemed to demand absolute honesty? In the silence, the valley waited, patient yet unyielding. The distant sounds of Monroe and his men, now regrouping after their disorientation, added urgency to the moment. I, Ethan Hawke, he tried again, the words coming slowly but gaining certainty. Son of Sarah Hawke, come to Echo Valley seeking understanding of my mother's work, of the burden I've carried, of the walls I've built between myself and others. He paused, surprised by the admission that had formed itself without conscious thought. Nieli's eyes encouraged him to continue. I bring my mother's words, he said, to honor her memory and her vision. And I come seeking release from the curse I believed in for too long. The final words seemed to hang in the air between them, then spread across the water's surface like the earlier ripples. Ethan felt something shift within himself, a loosening, a liberation, as if naming the curse had begun to diminish its power. The valley hears, Nieli said softly. The waters remember. They remained there a moment longer, connected by touch and shared purpose, before Nieli led them back to shore. As they dressed, the first silver edge of the full moon appeared above the eastern ridge, casting long fingers of light across the valley. It's time, Nieli said, gathering the pages of the soul's melody. We must reach the singing stone before Monroe arrives. They waded across the shallows to the small island at the pool's center. The standing stone rose from its highest point, ancient carvings catching moonlight along its weathered surface. Symbols that transcended language, speaking of connection between worlds, between peoples, between the living and the dead. As they approached, Ethan felt an almost physical pressure, not threatening but intense, as if the air itself had thickened with anticipation. The whispers that had surrounded them earlier intensified, becoming a chorus of indistinct voices just below the threshold of comprehension. Do you hear them? Nieli asked, watching his reaction. Ethan nodded, unable to deny the sensory experience. What are they? Those who have gone before, those who died in violence or sorrow, without the chance for proper farewell. She placed her hand on the standing stone, her expression solemn. They wait for the soul's melody to give them voice, to bring them peace. The moon continued its ascent, its light now fully illuminating the pool's surface. The water began to change, its normal transparency acquiring a luminescent quality, as if the moonlight were not merely reflected but absorbed and transformed. We must begin soon, Nieli said, arranging the pages before them. When the moon reaches its zenith, a gunshot interrupted her, the sound cracking across the valley like thunder. They turned to see riders emerging from the tree line at the valley's edge, Monroe and his men, having pushed through the disorientation effects of the preliminary song. Take cover! Ethan pulled Nieli behind the standing stone as more shots followed, bullets striking water and stone around them. From their position, he could see Monroe clearly now, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Despite his 60-odd years, he sat his horse with military bearing, directing his men with practiced commands. 4 riders accompanied him, spreading out to surround the pool. Ethan Hawke. Monroe's voice carried easily across the water, amplified by the valley's acoustics. I know you're there, boy, hiding behind Apache skirts just like your mother did. The taunt was calculated to provoke, and Ethan felt anger rise within him. Monroe knew exactly who he was, had known all along. This wasn't just about capturing Nieli or finding Echo Valley. It was about finishing what he had started 30 years ago with Sarah Hawke. We need to complete the song, Nieli whispered urgently. The moon approaches its zenith. Hard to sing with bullets flying, Ethan replied, checking his rifle. I'll provide cover. When I start firing, move to the other side of the stone and begin the melody. I'll join when I can. Before she could protest, Ethan emerged from cover and fired 3 rapid shots, forcing Monroe and his men to seek shelter. Using the distraction, Nayeli moved to the stone's opposite face and began to sing, her voice rising clear and strong above the gunfire. The effect was immediate. The waters of the pool, already luminescent with moonlight, began to pulse in rhythm with her song. The whispers surrounding them coalesced into more distinct voices, joining Nayeli's in a ghostly chorus. Monroe's men faltered, clearly disturbed by the manifestation. One dropped his weapon entirely, backing away in superstitious fear. Another fired wildly, his shots going wide as his hands shook. Only Monroe himself seemed unmoved, his expression hardening into determination. He dismounted, drawing a pistol from his belt. "Silence that witch," he commanded, "before she completes the ritual." His remaining men advanced, firing with more precision now. Ethan returned fire, dropping one with a shot to the shoulder. But they were 3 against 1, and his position offered limited cover. A bullet grazed his arm, tearing fabric and skin in a line of fire. Another struck the standing stone inches from his head, sending stone fragments flying. Behind him, Nayeli continued singing, her voice never faltering despite the danger. The moment had come for Ethan to make his choice: continue fighting a battle he could not win, or join the song and trust in whatever power Echo Valley might hold. Logic argued for the former, but something deeper, something awakened by the valley and by Nayeli, urged the latter. With a final covering shot, Ethan turned and joined his voice to hers, the English verses weaving through her Apache words to create a harmony that seemed to resonate from the stone itself. Let barriers fall between the worlds. Let silence yield to voices. Remember, child, in unity, the broken find their wholeness. The pool's surface swirled into a vortex of luminescent energy. Whispers formed words in dozens of languages, somehow comprehensible to all who heard. Monroe and his men froze. A column of light rose from the water, reaching toward the moon. Within it, shapes appeared, human figures taking form. The dead, hundreds spanning the valley's history. Apache warriors, settlers, soldiers, and civilians, all victims of conflicts that had scarred this land for generations. And among them, growing more distinct as the song continued, a face Ethan recognized from faded photographs and fragmented memories. Sarah Hawk, her features softened by the watery medium but unmistakable in their essence. "Mother," he whispered, the word nearly lost in the song. She smiled, a gesture of such profound love that Ethan felt tears spring to his eyes. Beside her stood another figure, an Apache woman of similar age, bearing the same tattoo as Nayeli. Waking Bird, the previous dreamkeeper, his mother's friend and collaborator. The two women moved toward the center of the column, their spectral hands reaching for each other across the division that had separated their peoples in life. As their fingers touched, a pulse of energy radiated outward, washing across the valley in a wave of blue-white light. Monroe's scream cut through the moment, a sound of rage and denial. He charged forward, firing his pistol repeatedly at the column of light, at the spectral figures, at Ethan and Nayeli themselves. "It's not real," he shouted. "None of it's real. There's gold here, not ghosts." The bullets passed harmlessly through the watery apparitions, but one found its mark in Ethan's side, the impact driving him to his knees. Pain blossomed, hot and immediate, yet strangely distant, as if part of him remained anchored in the song rather than in his physical form. Nayeli moved to help him, but he shook his head, gesturing for her to continue singing. Her voice faltered momentarily, then strengthened, carrying the melody forward as Ethan struggled to rejoin despite the pain. Monroe reached the island now, wading through the shallows with single-minded determination. His face was contorted with a hatred that transcended rational thought, the culmination of a lifelong crusade against what he could not understand or control. "You'll die like your mother," he snarled at Ethan, protecting things that should be destroyed, believing in fairy tales instead of progress. He raised his pistol for a final shot, but before he could fire, the column of light surged forward, engulfing him in its luminescent embrace. Monroe screamed again, this time in terror rather than rage, as the spectral figures surrounded him. Ethan couldn't see exactly what Monroe witnessed within that embrace, but the effect was devastating. The judge fell to his knees in the shallow water, pistol dropping from nerveless fingers, his face a mask of horror and recognition. Whatever judgments he had passed in life were now being returned to him a thousandfold by those he had wronged. Through it all, Ethan and Nayeli continued the soul's melody, their voices blending in perfect harmony as the moon reached its zenith directly above the pool. The song built toward its crescendo, Apache and English verses culminating in a final shared refrain that bridged the division between languages. The circle closes, broken made whole. The waters remember what hearts try to forget. Healing flows like rivers to the sea. Peace returns on wings of forgiveness. As the final notes faded, the column of light slowly subsided, returning to the pool's surface in a gentle rain of luminescent droplets. The spectral figures dispersed, their forms dissolving into mist that settled over the valley like a blessing. Monroe remained on his knees, shoulders slumped in defeat or revelation. His men had fled, abandoning both their leader and their mission in the face of forces they could neither understand nor combat. In the sudden silence, Ethan became acutely aware of his wound. The bullet had entered his side, lodging against a rib. Blood soaked his shirt, warm and persistent. He pressed his hand against it, trying to stem the flow, but darkness encroached at the edges of his vision. Ethan. Nayeli was beside him, supporting his weight as he swayed. Hold on, the waters, they can heal you. At the pool's edge, she bathed his wound with water still glowing from the ritual, the liquid flowing like living light over his injury. The sensation was extraordinary, a deep warmth reaching beyond flesh to something essential. Pain gave way to tingling awareness as the waters worked their magic. The soul's melody awakened the valley's power, Nayeli explained. These healing waters, protected by my people for generations, are far more valuable than gold. Ethan watched in astonishment as the bullet wound began to close, new tissue forming before his eyes. Within minutes, only a pale mark remained where the injury had been, a scar that would fade with time, unlike the deeper one on his chest. How is this possible, he murmured, touching the healed area with cautious fingers. The valley exists at the intersection of worlds, Nayeli replied, physical and spiritual, seen and unseen. The waters draw power from both, especially when activated by the soul's melody. Ethan's gaze moved to Monroe, still kneeling in the shallows, seemingly oblivious to their presence. And him? What happens to him? He has seen truth, Nayeli said quietly, the faces of those he killed or ordered killed. Their pain, their fear, their final moments. He experienced them all. Some minds break under such knowledge. As if hearing himself discussed, Monroe looked up. His eyes, once sharp with authority and hatred, now held the vacant stare of a man whose foundations had crumbled beneath him. I saw her, he said, his voice barely audible. Your mother. And all the others. They showed me everything. He shuddered visibly. So many, too many. Ethan felt a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction that Monroe finally faced the consequences of his actions, pity for the broken man before him, uncertainty about what justice demanded in this moment. What do we do with him? He asked Nayeli. Before she could answer, Monroe spoke again, his words slightly more coherent. The woman, Sarah Hawk, she said something to me, a message for you. He looked directly at Ethan. She said, the curse ends here. Choose life, not isolation. Complete what we began. The words struck Ethan with the force of physical impact. They were precisely what his mother would have said, what she had tried to teach him in life, what her journal had emphasized throughout. The validation of her presence, her continued connection to him despite decades of separation, overwhelmed his customary defenses. What happens now? He asked Nayeli, his voice unsteady. She gazed across the valley where dawn light had begun to touch the eastern peaks. We have completed the soul's melody. The division is healed, at least in this sacred place. Those who died in violence have found peace. And the waters, their healing power, will remain accessible to those who approach with pure intentions. Nayeli's expression grew solemn, but they must be protected, kept from those who would exploit them for profit or power. The implication was clear. Someone needed to serve as guardian for Echo Valley to ensure its gifts were respected and properly used. The responsibility his mother had accepted, then passed to Mary Crow, now awaited new stewards. "You're suggesting we stay," Ethan said, the concept both alarming and strangely appealing. "Become caretakers of this place." "I am suggesting we fulfill the roles we were born to." Naeli took his hand, her touch warm and anchoring. "You are the son of Sarah Hawk, inheritor of her vision. I am the last dream keeper of my people. Together we could bridge worlds, as they intended." "Masterbed together," Ethan repeated, the word carrying implications that both thrilled and terrified him. "According to your sacred law, that would make us husband and wife," she finished, "but only if you choose it, freely and completely." The vision showed possibility, not certainty. The future remains unwritten. Ethan looked out across the valley, now transformed by morning light. The pool had returned to its natural state, though subtle luminescence still shimmered beneath its surface. The standing stone gleamed, its ancient carvings more distinct after the night's events. And all around them, the land itself seemed renewed, vibrant with possibilities. For so long, he had defined himself by what he had lost, by the walls he had built, by the connections he had severed. The curse he carried was indeed of his own making, a shield against the pain of further loss, but also against the joy of true connection. His mother's message echoed in his mind. The curse ends here. Choose life, not isolation. Complete what we began. Could he do it? Could he set aside decades of solitude to embrace a future with this remarkable woman in this extraordinary place? Could he trust that caring for others might bring something other than inevitable loss? Monroe stirred, drawing Ethan's attention. The broken man attempted to rise, stumbling in the shallow water. "What about him?" Ethan asked, the practical question temporarily displacing his existential one. Naeli considered. "He has received the valley's judgment. His mind may never fully recover from what he witnessed, but justice does not require his death." "We'll take him to the nearest settlement," Ethan decided. "After that, his fate is his own." As the sun cleared the eastern ridge, they gathered their belongings and prepared to depart the island. Monroe followed with the docility of the profoundly altered, offering no resistance when Ethan bound his hands. At the shore, Ethan paused, looking back at the standing stone, the pool, the place where his mother's spirit had appeared to him. A sense of completion filled him, of circles closing and new ones beginning. "Your mother would be proud," Naeli said softly, reading his thoughts. "Yes," Ethan agreed, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "I think she would." They led Monroe to the horses, secured him on one of the mounts his men had abandoned, and began the journey out of Echo Valley. But as they reached the guardian stones that marked the valley's entrance, Ethan stopped. The valley spread behind them in morning light, its beauty and mystery now clear to him. The thought of leaving it unprotected settled uneasily in his chest. "We'll return," Naeli said, reading his thoughts. "This place has waited decades. It will wait a little longer." Ethan nodded, yet hesitated, some final barrier resisting the commitment such a return would represent. Naeli moved her horse alongside his, reaching across to touch his face with gentle fingers. "The curse ends here, Ethan Hawke, but only if you let it." In her dark eyes, he saw reflected all that might be possible. Partnership, purpose, healing, love. Things he had denied himself for so long, they seemed almost foreign concepts. "I saw you in my dreams," she said softly. "Now I see you in the waking world, at the crossroads of choice. What do you choose?" The question hung between them, simple yet profound in its implications. Behind them, Echo Valley waited, patient as the mountains themselves. Before them stretched a journey back to the world of men, with all its complications and compromises. But the true journey, Ethan realized, was neither geographical nor physical. It was the path from isolation to connection, from self-imposed curse to self-determined blessing. "I choose," he began, the words coming with surprising ease as something long frozen within him finally thawed, "to complete what they began. With you, if you'll have me." Naeli's smile dawned like the rising sun, warming places within him long left cold. "According to the sacred law, you are my husband now," she said, echoing her first declaration to him days ago, but now with shared understanding rather than mystical pronouncement. And according to my heart, Ethan replied, you are my wife. The simple exchange held more power than any formal ceremony could have provided. In that moment, in the shadow of ancient guardian stones, with Echo Valley as their witness, they forged a bond that transcended cultural differences, historical divisions, personal fears. They would return to the valley, Ethan knew with sudden certainty, would become its guardians, would ensure the soul's melody continued to bring healing to those in need. In the autumn of 1885, with the wounds of decades of conflict still fresh, they would build a life that honored Sarah Hawk's vision and Waking Bird's wisdom, a bridge between peoples too long divided. The curse had ended. The healing had begun. As they rode forward into the new day, Ethan felt something he had not experienced in decades, the sensation of possibility, of future unbound by past, of hope unclouded by fear. And somewhere in the space between worlds that Echo Valley represented, he sensed his mother's approval, her joy, her final peace. The soul's melody had found its voice at last. The journey back took longer than their trek to Echo Valley. Monroe, though docile, required constant attention, his mind drifting between moments of lucidity and confused terror as the spirit's judgment continued to work through him. They stopped at a small trading post where a telegraph operator sent word to Fort Redemption about the judge's condition, a message carefully worded to mention illness rather than supernatural encounter. 3 days later, they reached Eagle's Nest. Mary Crow was waiting, as if she had known the exact moment of their return. The valley spoke to you, she said, not a question, but a statement as she helped Monroe down from his horse. It did more than speak, Ethan replied. Mary nodded, studying Monroe's vacant expression. I'll tend to him. The territorial authorities will come, but they'll find a man changed beyond recognition. The power he wielded is broken. What will they do with him? Nigeli asked. Men like Monroe are rarely punished by man's law, Mary said. But he carries a heavier sentence now than any court could pronounce. The faces of those he wronged will be his companions until his final breath. That night, as they rested in Mary's cabin, Ethan and Nayeli spoke of what would come next. The practical challenges of establishing themselves as Echo Valley's guardians were considerable. Supplies, shelter, protection against winter. My father's people must be told, Nayeli said. Some will join us, I think. The Dreamkeeper's role has always been to bridge worlds. And those who don't approve of your choice? Ethan asked, the concern genuine. Nayeli smiled. The sacred law transcends personal preference. Besides, Red Wolf has seen enough conflict. He will recognize the pattern completing itself. A week later, they rode toward the Apache reservation with Mary Crow accompanying them, a respected elder whose presence would ease tensions. The reunion with Nayeli's people was initially cautious, especially toward Ethan. But when Red Wolf emerged from his lodge, his reaction surprised many. The man from my daughter's dreams, he said in Apache, which Mary translated. I have seen your face in the smoke of council fires these past 20 years. The old chief's acceptance opened the way. That night, around a ceremonial fire, Ethan and Nayeli shared the story of Echo Valley, the soul's melody, and the healing waters. They spoke of Sarah Hawk and Waking Bird's vision, a place where both peoples could find healing for ancient wounds. We will need help, Nayeli told her people, strong hands to build, wise minds to learn the valley's ways, hearts brave enough to begin anew. By the time they departed 3 days later, 5 Apache families had chosen to join them, mostly elders and young couples seeking a future beyond the reservation's confines. Among them was a healer named Silent Fox, whose knowledge of medicinal plants would complement the valley's healing waters. Their final stop was the territorial office in Redemption, where Ethan filed a land claim for the valley, not in his name alone, but as a joint trust between himself and the Apache representatives. The clerk was bewildered by this unprecedented arrangement, but the paperwork was sound, backed by financial resources Mary Crow had quietly maintained for decades. Your mother would approve, Mary told him as they left the office. She always said the land belongs to no one and everyone. 1 month after they had first fled Shadow Canyon, Ethan and Nayeli led their small band of pioneers back through the Guardian Stones into Echo Valley. The season had turned. autumn giving way to winter's first breath. But in the valley, protected by high walls and warmed by mysterious thermal springs, the grass remained green and welcoming. They made camp near the central pool, where moonlight still caused the waters to shimmer with subtle luminescence. That night, Ethan and Nayeli performed a simplified version of the soul's melody, not the full ritual, but enough to affirm their commitment to the valley's protection. As the last notes faded, Ethan felt a sense of rightness settle over him like a comfortable blanket. The curse was broken, the healing continued, and somewhere in the space between worlds, he knew his mother and Waking Bird were smiling. Tomorrow, he said, looking at their companions gathered around the fire, we begin building. Nayeli's fingers intertwined with his, strong and certain. We already have, she replied. And in Echo Valley, where the boundaries between worlds grew thin, the future took root and began to grow.